Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the brand new Mystery Sleuth channel. Now, this channel was actually a podcast that had been in the works for quite a while, but an event happened this weekend that I really felt the need to report on and wanted to give some of my thoughts. In the future, if this channel takes off, I would like to take a deep dive into various mysteries from around the world. But for now, and without further ado, let's get right into today's topic. So for all of you Patricks that have been living under a rock for the past few days, on Sunday, a submersible that was making a trip to the Titanic crash site went missing. Now, a submersible is essentially a submarine that does not have enough power to leave and come back to port on its own. It requires a mothership that can launch and recover it. So this submersible was property of OceanGate, which is a private company that provides crewed submersible assets and expertise commercially and for military applications. Something it's widely known for is taking wealthy individuals down to the Titanic wreck for $250,000 per person. Yes, you heard that right. It is $250,000 per person. Well, that's exactly what was happening on this Sunday. The CEO of OceanGate, who was also piloting the submersible with over 30 dives to the Titanic under his belt, was essentially transporting four individuals who had all paid the hefty $250,000 to the Titanic crash site. It's a trip that typically takes well over 2 hours to reach the wreck itself, but approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes after the dive began, the mothership, named the Polar Prince, lost contact with the submersible. Now, it took the Polar Prince 8 hours to report this sub is missing. And if you're wondering why it took them so long to report it, well, this isn't the first time that this sub has lost contact. In fact, reports have suggested that it was actually quite common. Of course, on all the other occasions, contact was eventually reestablished. Now, as soon as the Polar Prince reported the sub as missing 8 hours after loss of contact, a massive search began with both the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, as well as the Canadian Coast Guard and Armed Forces. While the search escalated, so too did speculation. It was rampant. It was also a very captivating story, much like the Titanic itself. Questions were endless, theories were popping up all over the place, and above all else, everyone wanted to know what happened and where the sub and crew were. Did the submersible implode, killing everyone instantly? Did they lose power and were somewhere towards the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean trapped? Did they make it to the wreck of the Titanic and get trapped in debris? Or did they abort mission and were somewhere trapped floating in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? The possibilities were endless, and it all made for a very sensational story. The Coast Guard eventually estimated that if the crew on this sub were still alive, they would have roughly 96 hours of oxygen to sustain them. Considering the crew went missing on Sunday, this meant that they had until approximately Thursday morning at 6 a.m. Now, the 96-hour estimate is exactly that. It's just an estimate. It does not factor into things like human fear that could very well be possible in a situation like this. On the other side, there are certain factors that could allow them to actually surpass that 96 hours. So in reality, although everyone in the media really ate up the 96 hours, it didn't mean a whole lot in my opinion. Still, imagining 5 people being trapped in a small submersible that has been compared to the size of a minivan over 12,000 feet under the Atlantic Ocean in freezing cold, pitch black water is terrifying. The 96 hours just made it even more so. During the search and rescue mission, the past few days, there were obviously all kinds of technology and machinery aiding in the search. Sonar was one such device. On Tuesday, sonar picked up some sounds, and it was reported by many that these were considered banging sounds, leading many to believe that the crew were somewhere trapped inside this vessel and banging on the walls to try to get help. It also provided hope to the families. There were experts that were supposed to try to distinguish what these sounds actually were and if they could be man-made. But in the meantime, search and rescue efforts really focused and pinpointed in on this location for the search. Unfortunately, these results didn't turn up anything. So finally, we get to Thursday morning. The 96-hour window is now passed. And at this point, there were some rumors that debris may have been found, but there was nothing substantiated. And otherwise, there was no signs of this sub. So the 96-hour mark has passed. There's really no information on where this sub could be. We have no idea still. But later on in the day, the Coast Guard set up a press conference as they had been doing throughout this ordeal. They confirmed everyone's worst fears. Approximately 1,600 feet from the Titanic on the bottom of the ocean floor was indeed debris that was found. They confirmed that this debris belonged to the submersible. Now, essentially what this meant is the sub had indeed suffered a catastrophic implosion. In an implosion such as this, the crew would have died instantly. There probably wouldn't be much of anything left. Now, obviously, this is a heartbreaking scenario. I can only imagine what the family members are going through. I imagine there's going to be a huge investigation. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are lawsuits. Now, this video isn't to get too much into the details of the company, but essentially there have been a lot of reports that safety was not the number one concern for this company. However, the individuals did get into the submersible knowing they would be bolted in and took a dive over 12,000 feet under the water to see a wrecked ship. They signed waivers and they paid a huge price. Obviously, now we know it was more than just the financial cost. A lot of people have been talking about that they made a really bad and frankly dumb choice. But look, I can't fault someone who has this kind of money to want to see the Titanic. It's captivating. It's historical. Even I am fascinated by it. And in fact, before all this happened, I had read up on this trip myself and thought it's something I'm sure I'd never actually do. I'm not the biggest risk taker out there. It was always kind of a pipe dream of mine. So no, I can't blame them. And it doesn't make it any less tragic either. I can't imagine what the families are going through. We can only hope that some good will come out of this, perhaps with more regulations. But there was something I wanted to note here. Although we don't know exactly when, how, or why this catastrophic implosion took place, it does seem to me that it happened right when the sub lost contact. And if that's correct, then there's a few reasons why it's a positive. Firstly, it means the crew probably didn't suffer. While we were all frenzied, as I'm sure the search crews were, trying to figure out where these people were, they were most likely already long gone. And secondly, when those noises were picked up by sonar, it seems to me that the Coast Guard essentially pulled all of their resources, or at least most of them, into searching right where those sounds were coming from, when in reality, the sub was right where you'd expect it to be, near the Titanic wreck itself. So to me, the Coast Guard could have really botched this whole thing if nearly all of their resources were going into this phantom sound that was never actually from the sub itself. So thankfully that was not the case, because this would just be all the more tragic if we were looking in the wrong place while these poor individuals were suffocating or even freezing to death. So again, I do believe that this crew has been gone since the moment contact ceased, and I don't believe there was any suffering. Of course, more will come out in the future, which should provide at least some clarity. But at this point, my thoughts are that there was some sort of hull breach, or that they descended too quickly into the depths and the sub simply couldn't handle the pressure and imploded, killing all of them instantly. My heart goes out to the victims and to their families, and I hope closure is at least of some comfort for the families. I didn't want this to be anything super long. I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts, and I do appreciate anyone that is listening to this, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts as well. But for now, thank you all again, and stay safe out there.